Okay, here we are, ladies and gentlemen, and this is a very important program we've got going today. We hope that you'll all, if you can't take part, at least that you'll tune in and listen for at least part of the time for the next 90 minutes. We have a special guest in here from law enforcement, and we're also going to have some other folks from social agencies, right, John?
Yeah. Well, we have a. Got to turn my mic on.
Go. There you go.
We have a superintendent, I believe, coming in from Sealy Lake. So
Okay.
it's a bit of a drive.
Okay.
But he'll be here shortly. Should be here anytime. But meanwhile, we've got a bevy of guests already in studio.
Yep, we've got Jace Dickin, who's a chief deputy coroner. We got Lauren Hochhalter, I know, who is the chaplain with the sheriff's office, and Mike Sunderland, who's a deputy. And we're here to talk about suicide. So, and I realize it's not a happy topic at all, but it's a very important topic. And I know that Missoula has certainly had its problems with suicide. The rate has gone up quite a bit over the last several years. And
15%, I think, just last year.
Okay, all right. So who wants to start? So, Mike, you're right in front of the microphone there. So tell us your role in this whole topic.
Well, I'm a resident deputy out of Sealy Lake. And here over the last, month and a half, we've experienced several students that either attempted or expressed the interest in committing suicide. So I went to our administration, I went to Lowell, and I said, hey, we need to step up and do something.
Okay. So, Lowell, grab the microphone there, young man. Go ahead. There you go. So Lowell, tell us a little bit. I knew your predecessor, Chuck Lee, real well.
Mm-hmm.
And so tell us your role as chaplain for the Sheriff's Department. How does that work?
Well, really, this is where my two worlds collide. I always tell people my real job, apart from being the chaplain, is I do school assembly programs all across the United States. In the last few years, it's been focused on human trafficking. But as we have searched into the vulnerabilities of students in that realm, we have realized that bullying and suicide, both of those components play a very high role when we look at human trafficking. So we've dug backwards and realized that we need to address the vulnerability of students. And so when Mike came down from Sealy and we began these discussions, I said, well, why don't we bring our school assembly program that we do everywhere else in the world, basically. Right. Why don't we bring that home? And so that's where the discussion ramped up from there, and the sheriff got behind it. And
so what are your assemblies about? So before you started talking about suicide, what kind of things did you cover?
Well, we talk about bullying, suicide, self-acceptance, challenging students. Really, the Say Something assembly is so basic and so simple that the whole idea is to challenge students that you have permission to say something about your friends, to somebody in your community. Say something that could save a life. Mm-hmm. And we've lived with this unofficial mantra in our nation that says, mind your own business.
Right.
Well, it hasn't gotten us very far. In fact, it's gotten us in a lot of trouble. It's isolated us. And so now our challenge is to give permission to people to literally say something. You may not know the right thing to say, but at least say something.
Right. Now, you may not realize this, but you're looking at this amazingly well-developed body that I have now.
Amazing.
No one has realized that.
I was a little small guy in school. I got picked on all the time. I was bullied from the time I was, whatever. And it was a pretty miserable existence,
Sure.
especially when you get into junior high and high school. Junior high, a lot of development going on, a lot of self-image, a lot of things that are imprinted on your psyche about who you are, the kind of person you are, your self-worth. And so is that what you're dealing with right now, is to try to help these kids who are in this situation to be able to say, wait a minute, I don't have to put up with this.
Not only do I not have to put up with this, but there are people that are there that care. And we have made it unpopular. We've made it the role of the weak to tell somebody, to go to somebody and say, listen, I'm uncomfortable. Listen, I don't like the way people treat me. Listen, I don't like the way people are talking to me and about me. And because there are school administrators, there are teachers that are there simply because they care about students. And if they just had a chance, they would step in. But the problem is it's unfortunately with suicide, you don't hear until the coroner comes knocking on the door.
Exactly. And of course, being the rugged individualists that we are in Montana, moms and dads say, well, develop a thick skin, son, or hang in there, it's going to get better. And those, they fall on deaf ears anymore, don't they?
Right. And the whole silence, it goes with anything. The silence helps no one. And so really we want to give students permission to say something. It's not a weak place to go to somebody and say, listen, I'm struggling here.
Okay. So, Jace, you're right over there. You got a microphone right in front of you. You're the one of the deputy coroners, chief deputy coroner. So this is something that you have to deal with, and it's probably the worst part of your job, especially when young people are involved. Could you give us a little idea of what your job is like and how you're affected by all this?
Well, Peter, it's kind of a strange way to make a living. We joke around about that.
Sure, yeah.
At the end of the day, I tell our young coroners and people who get into this portion of their duties as a deputy that, they always ask why, because it's not very fun to do death investigation. And we're the guys that go into these scenes. We're the guys that have to notify families. We're the guys that deal with the actual incident itself to determine whether or not there's been a crime. Once that's gone, we really are in the business of helping people who've been traumatized by this horrific act navigate crisis. Mm-hmm. And so if we can do that well, then we can help them in a way that puts us in a positive light forever. Consequently, if we do a poor job, we can really, really put a bad taste in somebody's mouth. So trying to handle that with professionalism and candor. But I want to say we're focusing here a little bit on the Seeley Lake community and what's going on there. And I'm just saying, as a coroner, as a guy who's been in tons of scenes, as a guy who's standing there in the midst of a scene where a young person has shot themselves, I don't want to do it anymore. And a little bit of your soul dies with every one of these. And you don't do these investigations without getting a window into somebody's soul. And what we're seeing is that we have to come at this with the mentality, we have to change a culture. I totally agree with you. Montanans are independent, self-sufficient people. They don't like to ask for help. We consequently think asking for help is weakness. And there's been some really unique similarities in the last few teenage suicides that we've seen in our jurisdiction. And part of that is the mindset of the young people themselves. Their maybe inability to know how to deal with conflict, their inability to recognize that they have other people in their lives. I deal with the families a lot. I'll just be honest and step out on a limb. I'm not a psychologist or anything, but the breakdown of the family unit and young people having a disconnect between their parents is one of the main common denominators in these youth suicides. They don't feel like they can talk to mom and dad. The other crazy dynamic we have is social media and smartphones. Yeah. And so, look at us, we're gray-haired. Social media has changed our world.
Some more than others.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But at the end of the day, Peter, these kids are spending more times with their smartphones and their technology than they are their parents.
And do you find that, so we're up against a break here, but the whole idea of social media was to provide a wider community. But what happens is people feel more and more isolated the more addicted they get to that network. Is that right?
To a certain degree, because there's that anonymity thing.
Right.
Everybody wants to voice their opinion and throw it out there, and they don't really have any accountability built in there, and that's another whole separate show. And I hate to just stereotype and say this is what's happening every time. What I'm saying is I think it's a multi-headed monster, and we need to start the conversation.
Okay, we're going to come right back and continue this conversation. So if you have a thought, give us a call. If maybe you have an experience you'd like to share, 721-1290 is our number, 1-800-568-5309. We're going to come right back right after this. All right, we are back. This is Talk Back. 721-1290 is our number, 1-800-568-5309. Jace Dickin joining us, the Chief Deputy Coroner. We have Lauren Hochhalter. We have Mike Sunderland, a deputy serving in the Seeley Lake area. And Chris Stout has joined us after he actually found the place. So, Chris, it's good to see you, man.
Nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
So Chris, tell us what you do out in Seeley.
So I am a superintendent in Seeley Lake, and then I work with the Condon School District just north of Seeley and do some other things, actually here in Missoula as far as education is concerned.
So tell us why you're here today.
Well, a couple weeks ago, Deputy Mike Sunderland approached me and was interested in bringing this program to the elementary school and to the community in Sealy. And given the experiences I've had in the last couple of years with students, and actually last year losing a really close friend of mine's son to suicide, I was all over it and said, "Sure, let's get the program here." And didn't really have any idea at the time at how big this is and what a quality program it is and everything else. I just thought anything we could do would help, and so now I'm really excited. I met these gentlemen a week and a half ago, to get the thing scheduled. So just wanting to bring awareness to the community and so on. I have to admit, being a school administrator, it's taken me a long time to kind of realize, what this actually looks like and what it means to students and so on, because it is. I mean, you're raised in a certain way, and you have a tendency to kind of brush things off and say, "Oh, no, it's going to be fine," or this or that. And in the last couple years, we've really just seen an escalation in this, and I don't know. I have deep concerns. So,
one of the things that here in media, the policy in media is usually, if it's a suicide, we don't report on it. We don't say anything about it because it's a private, personal, family matter, and sometimes where you feel intrusive or you're giving too much information in a matter that's so deeply personal to a family. So I guess I might ask you, our law enforcement professionals here, and maybe you too, Chris, is that a good idea? I mean, should not make a big deal of it, but to say this young person's life ended in a suicide, and not to make some sort of editorial statement about it, but maybe if people knew just how many times this happens in our community, it might, I don't know, start a conversation or get things rolling to maybe make some changes. So what do you think about that, Chris?
Last year in Sealy, we kind of had the same debate because it was one of our students and a high school student, and kind of a mixed opinion on that. But we decided that we'd take the route of actually discussing and having class discussions. And I think with this whole program, it encourages students to step up and say something. Since then, we've also started another program where it really illustrates we call them anchors that kids have in their lives. A lot of students even with parent support and so on, that are getting good grades and playing sports and everything else, when they're asked who they can go and talk to about these things, they say no one. And I think for most parents and myself as a school principal and everything else, it's really surprising, because you think they would feel as if they had someone to speak to. And so by having those conversations and letting other students know that they're not the only ones having these feelings, I think it really frees them up to be comfortable and go and speak to someone. So,
well, now, when it comes to speaking, quote, speaking to someone, you are opening up your personal self to somebody that maybe you don't know very well, and it could be very uncomfortable. It could be scary, So how do you get past that? So maybe Lowell, could you address that? When Lowell Hochhalter is the chaplain for the Sheriff's Department, and you're also a public speaker. Kids are kids. Their brains are not fully developed yet, quite literally, physically speaking. They have limitations, and so when it comes to a situation like this, it is quite literally life or death. How do you get them to be able to break through that wall and talk to somebody?
Well, I don't think the wall is as thick as we make it as adults. I mean, if we could all take ourselves back to that place in junior high or high school, I think if we look back, we have friends that we can think of that we talked about everything. I mean, everything. And so students I don't think they're afraid to talk to each other. I really believe that there is a stigma that we have set up with bullying, especially in Montana. We've already talked about that. Hey, you're weak, so put on the boxing gloves and duke it out and get over it. Well, sometimes you just can't get over it, simply because a kid at school, we challenge kids, when a kid walks in the door at school and you say, "Hey, loser," in a joking way, well, you have no idea that kid maybe came from home where dad or stepdad or foster dad or stepmom, whoever it might be, in a non-joking way said, "You're nothing but a loser." So you walk through that school door, and that's the first word you hear. And so you say to yourself, well, maybe I am.
Yeah, maybe they're right. Yeah.
Maybe they're exactly right.
Right.
And you have no one to talk to.
There's another aspect of this that often goes unaddressed, it seems to me. I have a very close person to me in my life that had suicide attempts, never successfully completed suicide, thankfully. And in investigating the problem behind the suicide, we later found out they also struggled with bipolar disorder. It was undiagnosed. No one in the family had ever had bipolar disorder before, and we didn't know how to relate at all with that issue. And I guess that's a question, I think, especially for people in the school systems with young people that, in those teen years is usually when those things trigger in somebody. And I guess my question, for all of you is how do we do a better job of helping students manage often some psychological issues that are very real, very, very disheartening, especially if they go undiagnosed?
We're going to talk about that when we come back. We also have Helen and James waiting to visit on the phone. We have a whole nother hour. This half hour has flown by, but we have a whole nother hour to talk about this. Really want to get your input, our listeners this morning. 721-1290 is our number, or 1-800-568-5309. We're coming right back after this. Okay, we're back. This is Talkback. 721-1290 is our number, 1-800-568-5309. We only have about 2.5 minutes before our top of the hour break, so I want to get at least one call in. And here's how this is going to work. I'm going to put you on and then turn off the microphones so our guests can hear you, Helen. So, Helen, you are on Talkback, and so please go ahead. What's your question?
Hi, I was wondering, when I went through the handbook for the school over bullying, the topic of bullying, it went into great detail about, the rights of the victims, per se, and what teachers and staff can do to help. But it didn't really say anything about consequences to the kids that are doing the bullying. And when I asked one of the teachers, who was a friend of mine that works there, she said, yeah, that's just how it is. There isn't really a consequence. My hands are totally tied. She said, I see it, and if I scold someone over it, she said, the next thing I know, I'm being hauled in the office for being harsh with a student. I'm just wondering, I've actually pulled 2 of my kids out of school and homeschooling them because of it. And I'm just wondering, where's the accountability if the parents don't even know about it? I mean, if I knew my kid was doing it, boy, I'd be on my kids like that. And I think a lot of parents aren't even aware the kids are doing this behavior.
Okay, Helen, thanks for the call. We will go ahead. Who wants to address that one? Chris, you're an administrator at school. Do you want to handle that one? Go ahead.
Yeah, this is Chris Stout from the elementary school. Yeah, honestly, I think it is a tricky subject. I'm not making any excuses, and I'm sure in the past I haven't handled all of these situations correct either. And I think that first of all, it's hard to set a specific set of consequences for any given behavior, but I think with the awareness and the programs that are being putting in place and the parent involvement and so on, that you will see changes in that and just a general better understanding from staff and students and so on. Typically, and I mean this answer is kind of whatever, but typically anytime there's a bullying situation or there's any type of behavior situation with students, there's 2 sides to the story. And oftentimes when you start to investigate these situations, you find that that something else happened or this was part of it or whatever, and then you have 2 parents on both sides of that. So it does make it very complicated. That's no excuse for myself or any other administrator in the state to ignore this and allow students to just continue to do it. And I think that's why it's important we're working on it.
Okay, we're going to come right back. We have a whole nother hour to talk about this, and we would appreciate your participation. And we also have James, Ed, and Emmett, and a line open for you at 721-1290. We're going to come right back right after this. And we're going to set the table again for you. We have guests in studio today. We're talking about suicide in western Montana. We have folks from the law enforcement community, and of course, Chris Stout is also here from Seeley Lake. Jace Dickin, Chief Deputy Coroner, Lauren Hochhalter is with us, Mike Sunderland with the Sheriff's Department, and Chris Stout.
It's Lowell.
Hochhalter.
Is that right? Okay.
Oh, sorry, Lowell. My bad. Well, he'll take me out. Do the woodshed thing later. But anyway,
he'll preach at you, I guess.
Now, Mike, we were talking about this during the break, that there are some things in common that kids who are bullied in your years of experience, that some commonalities here, right?
Yeah. In most cases, when I talk to or deal with any, child that's contemplating suicide or attempted, I always ask them why. Why do you want to do this? And, you know, a lot of times it's the bullying comes up and issues at home. They don't feel appreciated. But the one thing that I find that's fairly common is they feel like they're a freak, you know, that like they don't fit into society.
There's fundamentally something wrong with them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, you know, as an adult, that's hard for me to process because they're kids, right? And kids should not be feeling that way.
Real quick before we go to calls, Mike, you've been doing this, you said, for 20-something years, but how common is it that you come into contact with a student that is contemplating suicide and talking to you?
It's becoming more and more, you know, of an issue. It, you know, in a 2-week period just up in Seeley Lake, we had three instances where, you know, students,
3 different
one attempt
students?
and 2 that came forward, expressing their desire to commit suicide. And
Mike, let me interrupt. Can you give the ages of those? Because we need to understand, we got Radio Land out there.
Yeah.
The reality of how old those, just give some details on that.
And this is last year,
Not
Mike?
names, but
no, this was a month ago.
Yeah, we're not going to talk about names, but ages.
No
Yeah.
names. But
And male or
let's see,
female.
12, 13 are the most recent ones. But I actually received a phone call from a mother who had a son that was contemplating suicide at the age of 8.
Wow.
At the age of 8.
Yeah.
It's got to be terrifying.
And there was somewhere in the nation that I saw that, wasn't there like a 5-6-year-old male that shot himself here recently because he got sent to his room.
Wow. Well, let's get to the phones, and we're going to say hello to, let's see, got to say hello to James. James, you're on with our guest, so go ahead and share your thoughts with us. Please go ahead. James, are you there? Oops, hold on. I got the wrong one. James, I'm sorry. Please go ahead. You're up on talk.
There we go.
Okay.
Now I hear you.
Yes, sir.
Oh, I'm just kind of floored by that information just now. It just took me back. I can't believe how young they are. I just had a couple thoughts and questions, and it didn't sound like any of you guys are psychologists, right?
No, they are
But
law enforcement folks, yeah.
That's cool. See, to me, clinical responses aren't always, you know, very good ones. And I think there's a chance when you have a team like this talking to really figure some things out maybe that wouldn't otherwise be figured out. This is kind of close to my heart because I had a cousin that committed suicide only a few weeks ago. Wow. Anyway, so I had 2 thoughts and questions with him real quick. I'll try to be fast. My first one is, you know, in my life, it's been hard to understand why people feel that way. I've never been depressed. I've had depressed moments in my life, but always had the ability to rise above those and feel cheerful and happy about life in general. And so it took me a long time to understand the clinical depression and how that affects suicide. And so my first question is, what kind of advice you have for people that, you know, that are like we've been talking about, that you've been talking about, the Montanans that are like, hey, walk it off, suck it up, cheer up. You know, that's easy to do for some people, but when you have clinical depression, it isn't. You know, it's contrary. In fact, telling somebody that can push them further away and causes depression to get worse, from my understanding. So I'm just wondering what you would say for people like me who have a hard time responding in a empathetic way and not just saying suck it up. And then my other thought and question is, you guys mentioned social media. My cousin was on social media, and she, you know, I hadn't actually spoken to her in a long time, probably a few years, but we were close growing up, just like a little sister. You know, and I just kind of figured, social media, I'm kind of seeing how she's doing, and everything she posted there was always cheerful and always upbeat, and she looked so happy. And so my concern is that social media has become kind of a mask, and younger kids are using it. You know, you can be on it legally at 13, but I know for a fact kids lie about their age and get on there sooner, and it just seems like we rely more and more on that as an indicator when it might actually be a mask.
James,
so those are my thoughts. That's all.
Thanks for the call, James. We're going to have our guests comment on that. Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
So real quick, I just want to touch base on the social media thing because, in my opinion, it's a double-edged sword. And the reason why I say that is a lot of times, at least it seems to me, granted, I'm getting older, so I don't quite understand it, but, a lot of times people will speak out and talk via Facebook, Instagram, whatever it is, the Snapchat, before they'll actually talk to, somebody face to face. But I can tell you the last two children that I've dealt with, I got notified because they were Snapchatting other students. So on one hand, in my opinion, social media is not necessarily great for the bullying and the peer pressures. But on the other hand, had social media not been available, then I probably wouldn't have known about the two most recent students that I dealt with.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break, come right back. I know everybody wants to comment on this, and we have lots of phone calls. So we're going to turn this over to our other guests as well. We have Lowell, we have Chris and Jake's, and we're going to come right back with your phone calls as well as Talk Back continues in a moment. Hey, we're back. This is Talk Back. We have a very serious topic we're talking about. The phones are going crazy. We have Ed, Emmett, and Doug. We're going to get to you guys as soon as possible, but our guests in studio wanted to go ahead and expand a little bit about what Mike was saying. So, Jace or Lowell or Chris, please go ahead.
I just wanted to talk to James' first question a little bit.
This is Jay Sticken, by the way. Go ahead.
There's a misconception that that you have to be trained or equipped or have some super secret power or be a clinical psychologist to address this. And this is an epidemic in our community. And the mindset that we have right now is not working. And we need to change it. And we need to change it through education. And the biggest thing is, just like we're teaching these kids to say something, is even as adults. We say we have these friends and these relationships, and we're on social media, and we want all these likes, and we want so many people following our tweets. But do we care enough to ask the hard question, hey, are you okay? Hey, look somebody in the eye and ask them, are you contemplating harming yourself? And you don't have to be a rocket scientist to do that. And based on that answer, there's resources available. And so really, adults need to be trained too. And we've got all these different generations stair-stacked with their perceptions of how they communicate and what is normal to them. And so we need to cross those boundaries, and we need to, first off, James, just say something. If you truly care about something, take that risk. But see, we're all afraid of rejection. I'm afraid if I ask Peter if he's contemplated harming himself this week, that he's not going to like me. And then I'm going to have a negative experience and be hurt. We've got to get beyond that. These young people are hurting themselves, and they don't have the ability. A lot of the young people that we go to in these suicides we investigate, they're communicating with their friends, and friends aren't sure how to handle that knowledge. They're trying to do the best they can. Some of them aren't communicating at all.
Sure.
So,
go ahead, John. Sorry.
yeah, I've been in this conversation once before where, you throw the hot potato and they throw it back to you. Yes, I have, but not at this moment. Then what do you do? I mean, what do you do when you get a yes? Any advice?
It really is that. John, it's just like, the fact, what I heard when James called. Number one, you could hear the vulnerability with James. And, James, I could tell, number one, that you're hurt, obviously, by this person close to you that took their own life. But the fact is that if kids knew that there were people like James that were not only going to just listen to their problem and not just empathize, but say, you know what? Okay, you've now told me that you're struggling. You've told me that you're hurting. Well, I'm gonna be there. I'm gonna look you in the eye and tell you I'm going to be there for you. And the one with social media, the number one thing that pops into my mind when we talk social media is the word filter. If I was half the person that I portray myself to be on Facebook, I would be amazing. And there have been people that I have met personally that I have known on Facebook, and I see them and I'm like, you don't look at all like your profile pic. And every app that comes out now on social media is bent to change your image. Look thinner, hair or skin smoother, lips redder, teeth whiter, and we put this filter up. And so to become friends face to face, is difficult. And we want to hide behind that mask, just like James said, and it becomes this filter. But if you can be friends enough to break through that filter and say, listen, I care about you.
Let's get another phone call. This is Ed, been waiting the longest. Ed, you are on with our guests. Please go ahead.
Good morning. I've been listening to you guys, and you've hit a lot of interesting topics. I function as the executive director of the Rural Institute Veterans Education and Research, and I work as a clinical suicidologist here. And I did a lot of my studies postgraduate with the American Association of Suicidology. One of the points that everybody needs to remember is 40+% of all suicides are in the physical realm instead of the mental health realm, such as chronic pain, undiagnosed, like the one guy was talking about, the bipolar, which is very easily treated. So one of the things that we've got to watch for is the guys that are having the physical ailments. Another point is most people that are working in the mental health realm are not trained in suicidology. There is a House bill, I think it's House Bill 71, to require training for physicians and all the providers that is not required right now.
Is that a Montana House bill?
Third thing that...
Hold on a second, Ed. Is that in the Montana legislature or the national Congress?
That is in the Montana legislature.
Okay, thanks.
And finally, most people that are attempting to work with the suicide issues have not studied the current theories that are prevalent amongst suicidologists and are just treating symptoms like, are you feeling okay? Most of them don't. If you understand the reasoning behind why a lot of these things are taking place, it's a little easier to treat. River, the Rural Institute, we run a crisis line for veterans. We've had over 3,000 calls in the last 4 years, and we've worked with over 150 families that have had a veteran complete suicide. And in my postgraduate studies, the youngest child that I ever worked with a family on was 5 years old. Wow. So it goes all the way from 5 to whatever age you want to pick.
Hey, Ed, we're going to have, we got the lines are full, so go ahead, John.
Ed, those 3,000 calls, are those all Montana calls?
Ed, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I thought you said John, so I was shutting up.
Yeah, that John is me. Are those 3,000 calls that you got in, are they from Montana?
Are those 1,000 calls, are they all from, hold on, let me do this. Are those 1,000 calls you got, are they all from Montana, folks, or are they?
I would say that we have dealt with probably about 1,600 calls from Montana. We've got a big issue is a lot of the veterans are supposedly have PTSD, yet they're not being tested for other disorders such as vestibular or mild TBI, which PTSD masks. Those two are somewhat treatable, whereas PTSD is a lot harder to treat.
All right, Ed, we're going to have to take a break, but thanks so much for your call. We appreciate it. Please keep in touch, okay?
All right, if anybody wants to get a hold of me, you got my number.
Okay, thanks so much. We're going to come right back. 721-1290 is our number, 1-800-568-5309. We have Emmett and Doug, and we have 2 lines open for you, and, of course, our guests have lots more to say as well. Okay, we are back on Talkback, 721-1290, 1-800-568-5309. The call we just had a second ago triggered quite a bit of conversation during the break, and I know Jace, you wanted to, Jace Dickin, Deputy County Coroner, is here with us with the Sheriff's Office. And one of the reasons why we have law enforcement folks here, and of course Chris also with the school district over in Seeley Lake, is that you guys are the feet on the ground. You are the ones that do the responding to the actual trauma. And you are there when the family's going through all this. It isn't clinical. It's very raw and real. So if you wouldn't mind sharing some of the thoughts that you were talking about, Jace.
Well, first off, anybody who knows me and the guys in this room know that I'm kind of an all-or-nothing guy, so I'll try to ramp up my filter. I wanted to say thanks to Ed for the work that he does and dedicating his education and helping servicemen. As the father of 3 veterans and having my kids served tons of combat tours. The suicide among veterans is another whole show.
Right.
But it's funny. I want to speak to the fact that we recognize part of the reason you say, why are the cops on the radio and why do they care? We care because we got to do something in our community better. And I just wanted to say, I'm not a clinical psychologist. I don't have any of the credentials to be a certified counselor or any of that. I'm the guy who walks into a room about the size of this studio where a young person's head is missing, and there's not a square inch on any wall that's not covered with biohazard. And I have to do an investigation, and I have to put them in a bag. And if we're lucky, we'll get to leave the bag unzipped and maybe a child's hand sticking out, because all the parent's going to get is to hold that cold, dead hand. And that's the reality of what it is in my world. So am I jaded and maybe cynical? I could be, but I've been doing this a long time. And I just know that what's happening right now and the direction we've been going with teen suicide ages 15 to 24 going up by about 220 to 230 young people a year since 2010. That means that since 2010, probably 1,000 more young people aged 15 to 24 have killed themselves. Then we have to do better than that. And I want the word out there, and I just want people to get over the stigma of not saying nothing, because it doesn't do it. It's a messed up way to make a living when you're walking around picking up body parts and you have to tell your guys, other deputies, other fathers, other parents, guys, we got to keep going. We don't have enough of this set of remains, and we got to get everything we can so the family doesn't have to look at this. The family doesn't have to find this. The family doesn't have to. And that's a service we provide. As a cop, it hurts our feelings when I go to family gatherings and I get to hear from my truck driver father-in-law about the speeding ticket he got in Iowa in 65 for going 3 miles an hour over. Because the scope and the nature of our work is so much bigger than that. The hearts of law enforcement for our community is so much bigger than that. And sometimes we don't get to see that human piece. What I enjoy about this job is doing it, if I can do it well and help these families navigate crisis, then we can impact them positively. We can't take the hurt away, but we can impact them in a way that they recognize there's other people out there that care.
Sure.
I want to get to that point before the trigger is pulled, before the rope's around the neck, before the head's in the plastic bag. I don't have the ability to do that, but I think collectively, if we all own our piece, the fact that Chris is here as a school administrator and he's willing to work with us for his community, it's huge.
So, Chris, if you wouldn't mind jumping in here, from your perspective as a school administrator out in Seeley Lake, how does what Jay Sticken is talking about there is how is it affecting you?
Well, yeah, I mean, at first I'd just like to actually give a shout out to Deputy Heath Hansen up in Seeley as well. He's been there for years and years, and a lot of the students and community members feel like they can reach out to him personally. I didn't grow up necessarily in a rural community, but living in Seeley for quite some time, I realized that law enforcement, to a certain extent, is one of our only resources. And so it's important for us as a school and as a community to utilize those resources, and maybe even if it's just a gateway to, other services that are offered in Missoula and so on. So this program in particular is great. I think we're trying to paint the picture that law enforcement here is to protect us and to help us, not something you should be afraid of or fear. And so with Mike coming in and coming into the school every day and doing these things, it's really helped with that perception. And I think it's obvious because there's been students and parents reach out to him personally and so on. So anyway, thank God I don't have the job that was just described. I can't even imagine. But I have been the first one on the phone when something's happened, and speaking to the parents and not having a whole lot of formal training myself. It's very difficult, and so looking at a program like this and just the overall involvement of law enforcement in Missoula County, I think is a great thing.
Yeah, go ahead, Mike. Oh, John.
I'll tease in Mike because it is a question for him. You've mentioned the program a lot. I'll probably submit this as our show of the year program. I want it to be heard by other people, and this will be heard by another group of radio hosts elsewhere. But my question for you is this, Mike: what does the program look like in the school? I mean, what are you doing that other schools might be able to model or do differently to help combat suicide?
Well, when I first arrived in the Cedar Lake community, I'm brand new to the community. I really didn't know too many people. And when I was out on patrol, I would see kids and I would try to approach them and talk to them and stuff, and they were very standoffish. I'm the new guy, the big, bad, scary cop. So I thought, okay, I got to take a different approach to this and somehow get involved in the community so these kids start trusting me. So what I started doing was going to the school, hanging out at lunchtime with these kids, so they felt comfortable with me and with other law enforcement officers or maybe members of the fire department. But, I really believe that law enforcement has a really bad stigma in our country right now. I mean, it's, cops are getting shot every single day. And I think that a lot of times these kids see all this stuff on TV, so they're just automatically scared or apprehensive to talk to the police. And, so until I was able to get through that part and get the kids to where they were comfortable talking to me, that's when I started finding out about these thoughts of suicide or some of these attempts.
Because the whole idea is to protect and to serve, right?
I'll die for any kid. I mean, that's my deal.
We have a question from Louise that you could probably address better than most, and that is, are you finding that this trend is mostly among young men, or is it also females? I mean, who's coming to you?
Well, as of recently, it's been mostly females. So I really can't give you a good answer on that because, I've seen a lot of males, I've seen a lot of females, but as of lately, it's been a lot of females. And I think that there's a lot of drama, and Chris can attest to this, there's a lot of drama and stuff in these young girls. I mean, they are vicious.
Yeah, I mean, I know we're focusing a lot of attention on the bullying, both in school and out of school and so on. And I just like to point out that there are lots of students that you would never in a million years think have anything going on. And maybe they are being bullied, maybe they're not, but they have other issues. I think that's something that a program like this and just overall awareness and recognition is that you can't identify a particular student and say this student I believe this student would be at risk and this student wouldn't be. I think with all of the cases in Sealy that I've dealt with, they've all been a surprise. It's like, how could I be so blind? This student has been with me for years, and I never realized or thought this.
And money does not play in to this issue. Rich or poor, it doesn't matter.
All right, we're going to come right back. We have callers waiting. We'll get to you just as soon as we can. Thanks so much for joining us. This is a powerful program, and it's going to be up on our podcast later on. So if you get a chance to listen to the whole thing, you can do that later. We will be right back. Talk back, rolling right along. Thanks so much for joining us here this morning. Our guests in studio include Jay Sticken. He's the Chief Deputy Coroner for Missoula County. Lowell Hochhalter. He's is not only a public speaker, but is also the chaplain for the Sheriff's Department. Mike Sunderland is a deputy serving Sealy Lake. And Chris Stout is here as well, works there in the schools at Sealy Lake. So, Lowell, we haven't had a chance to hear from you for a while, so go ahead, sir.
Well, when John asked about what the program looks like, the program that we're going to be bringing to the Sealy Lake area is our Say Something Assembly. And like I said at the very outset, is the whole goal is to give kids permission to say something, but also to give students that are in the room the opportunity to identify, to come up to a law enforcement officer, come up to a teacher, come up to a principal, because they do. Peter, we do this assembly all across these United States. We've been in front of 600,000 students, and it doesn't matter if it's in front of a school of 3,500 or in a school that's rural of 100 to 200. At the end of this assembly, students will come up and they'll say, "Thank you. That's my story, but I didn't think anybody cared to listen to it." What's unique about our situation is, number one, that we have a sheriff that has not only endorsed what's happening, but is behind the whole idea of the prevention and getting his chief deputy coroner, getting his deputies out there, being involved in the community. And that's rare. But then we have a school with Chris that when we sat with Chris in his office and he was able to tell us the amount of resource that he has available, not only for his teachers, but for his students, it's amazing. And so this isn't just something where we're going to come in, set up a few video screens and some fancy lights and do a quick show and go, hey, remember, love, peace, and joy. That just doesn't work. But once that's over, people are equipped to talk to one another and, again, that permission to reach out and say something.
Now, you deal especially with suicide and bullying kind of simultaneously, right?
Correct.
I'm going to read this. This is something that was posted on our Facebook page. At some school, unnamed school, I'm not even going to name the last name of the person that posted it. But Jay says, our son has been bullied numerous times. Toughen up was a loud message we often heard. A coach even said some are strong and some are weak in response. The bully did not miss practice or athletic events. When our son ended up with a concussion and a resulting depression on top of the bullying, he came to us with suicidal thoughts. Once again, the school administration said, well, it's a he said, she said situation. And while they showed us forms and complaints that we could use and they would be implementing them in their anti-bullying program, the thing is that this bullying was a baton passed from one brother to another and a group of people over a number of years because they were given repeat passes. Counselors are overburdened and don't have time to stay in touch. Staff is not properly equipped. Parents are often made to feel like they are the troublemakers instead of the advocates. Everyone seems to be protecting their own interests instead of saying enough is enough to the bullying, ignorance, and arrogance. It's so frustrating, especially with a hurting kid. Education is an answer for sure, but I wonder about the approach. Like Peter, our son was on the bullying end of the stick throughout his school years. He was slow in his physical development, but very athletic, and a sensitive kid by nature. He was just a target. We need to tap into the types of kids that are targets and educate staff and students alike for preventative measures for potential bullying. We also have to make it matter for those kids who do speak up and say something.
Okay, so Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess the first response for me is, as an administrator, I've probably been there, done that. I'm sure we could get parents calling here and say, our kid was bullied in Seeley Lake, and Chris did nothing about it. And to a certain extent, that may have been true. I think as a school administrator, you have a responsibility to all the students in the school. And as we were discussing on one of the breaks, oftentimes some of these students, bullying other students have as deep emotional, psychological issues as the students that are the victims. And once again, that is definitely not an excuse for allowing this to continue in the schools. And I think parents do need to stand up. A couple years ago, I had some parents that came in and really told me, hey, this is a serious issue in our lives, and we expect the school to step up and do something about it. And I don't know that my response was probably adequate, to be honest. And so I think looking at programs like this, receiving additional training, I just finished my last class for my PhD, and yet I don't think I took one single class that really had anything or any training to do with any of these situations. And so it's new. And while you send your kids to school and you hope they're in the hands of professionals that know what they're doing, a lot of this is out of our realm. And I think in the coming years, we're going to really see some trainings and opportunities for people to be able to do things different. But parents do need to be the advocates for their kids.
Okay, we're going to come right back. We're trying to get some phone calls, but the testimony here in the studio is so poignant. I really want to keep it going. So we're going to come right back with more of Talk Back right after this. Okay, we're back on Talk Back. 721-1290 is our number, and we have had a very moving almost an hour and a half. Believe it, the time is flying by. We have Jay Sticken here in the studio with us, Lowell Hochhalter, Mike Sunderland, and Chris Stout, and we've been talking about the problem with suicide, specifically in the Seeley Lake area, but also here in Missoula and in Montana. So should we take a phone call, gentlemen, real quick? And let's Emmett's been waiting the longest. So, Emmett, you are on Talk Back real quickly. What's your question?
Oh, thank you. It's a fascinating topic, and I think we should have another conversation on another show about this same thing or bullying. A few points. I'll try to be brief. After listening to this, could your guests address cyberbullying? I've heard that cyberbullying is very much a cause in some of this because it's like a lot of these kids who are bullied, they can't get away from the bullies at the end of the day. They're cyberbullied sometimes literally it drives them to commit suicide. I've heard of that. But also, I do believe that children should be allowed, to express their feelings openly, encouraged to cry openly, and share things, with their close friends openly, and these type of things. And I also believe that we are such a secularized society that children do need God and religion in their lives as an anchor, that there is hope for an afterlife, that they have, support of rabbis and, of church leaders to go to, and this sort of thing. So those are my comments, if that could be addressed.
Thanks so much. So, gentlemen, anyone want to jump in on what Emmett just said? So go ahead.
This is Jace with the Sheriff's Office, and I think cyberbullying is a reality. It's a reality of our social media world. It's hard, and we've heard some of the parents, we're wanting to move forward, and those that are engaged in a part of their kids' lives want a consequence. And unfortunately, there's lots of loopholes in the system, and the system really isn't designed yet to give maybe the consequence those parents want. It's the same with cyberbullying. We like to put, as law enforcement officials, when I go into a scene and I take a call like that, I talk with the parents first. And I'll be honest with you, I'm a pretty good judge of character. And I can know usually within the first minute and a half, and Mike can maybe attest to this, but whether those parents are engaged and they're involved and they want to be a part of trying to come up with a solution, or if those parents are burnt out and they're hurt and they're frustrated and life's getting away from them and they want somebody else to handle it. And so this topic is so hard because we're picking at a scab on a volcano, and once that thing erupts, it could go to any section of where our culture and our society's at. Right now, law enforcement and legal statutes in Montana haven't caught up with the idea of giving a consequence. When it comes to cyberbullying, what I as a law enforcement officer and as a father would want is parents to be engaged enough to monitor what their kids are seeing. Parents to be engaged enough to check emails and Snapchats and screenshots and try to help that. But in our culture and society, with blended families and single-parent families and everybody's busy, that's a challenge. That's the reality of it, is a challenge.
Fear of litigation.
Yeah. At the end of the day, we've got kids with smartphones and social media and computers unmonitored, and that's actually becoming a somewhat larger influence in some of these kids' lives than the parents are. And it's not that those are evil parents. It's not to throw stones.
Right.
I get the fact life is hard. Part of the assembly is the evening we bring the parents back. We do an assembly for the kids during the afternoon, and then that evening the parents of Seeley Lake are going to be able to come back and watch part of what the children...
Let's just say they're invited to come back.
Yeah. Whether they will or not, that's the telltale sign.
Right. So, Mike, go ahead.
Well, that's probably been one of my largest tasks up there in Seeley, is going around and trying to promote the parent portion of this assembly, because the kids are going to be there, right? They're going to come from their classroom. That's not going to be a problem. The problem that I see is getting the parents, or even other adults that, want to get behind us and help us support within the community. We want everybody to come, whether you're a parent, an adult without a child, had a child grow up in that community, whatever. So I'm really hoping that we get a good turnout, because this is such a huge topic and it's a community issue. Whether people want to believe that or not, this is a community issue, because if we lose one child or even one adult, it affects the entire community.
When exactly is the time and date of the meeting?
Okay, so on January 17th, this is going to take place at the Seeley Lake Elementary School in the gym. So the student assembly is going to be at 1 p.m., and then the adult assembly will take place at 6:30 p.m.
Let me ask you this. What do you hope will happen with the adult assembly? What is, if your fondest dream could come true, what, Jace, or you jump into the microphone there. So go ahead. What is your fondest wish for these parents?
Well, having raised 3 kids and having been in that situation where parenting's hard, and as a father and a husband and a dad, there's not a lack of stuff going on in my world, and it's easy to become disconnected, and it's easy to commit the rearing and education of our kids to other people. What I hope to see is a light bulb go on in those parents' eyes when they see the video of their child's response to this information that they've been presented with, to their child's response of, hey, because if we show the video of the kid's response coming out of the bleachers, and they're going to be able to see if their kid's going forward. We're hoping to get a connection there and maybe an awareness to that parent. I would just, if I could get any message to parents, it's, look, we need to just slow down, and make the time to be with our kids. Make the time to help them learn how to resolve conflicts. Almost all these young people that kill themselves have warning signs before they attempt or complete the act. But a lot of times in our busy, hubbub society where we're just going a million miles an hour, trying to make a living, trying to do everything well, and there's not a lack of activity in our world. And that's the nature of the page we're on. I don't expect or even believe that we can change that. But if I could get a parent to stop and connect, if I could get a parent to take a cell phone away and set it down and have a conversation for 5 minutes over a bowl of macaroni and cheese, a real, honest-to-God conversation, not the, hey, and I've been there as a parent. How was school today? Oh, and I don't want to know how school is today. I'm trying to fulfill my fatherly role because we actually have 5 minutes and I got my checklist that I got to get off. Because there's not a lack of stuff in my world as a man and a father and a husband and a cop. You know, I got lots to do. And a lot of times it's going through the motions, and we like to do that. But an honest-to-goodness, eyeball-to-eyeball contact conversation would be huge.
We're going to come right back. Stay with us. 1 minute timeout. Stay with us. It's a sense of power. All right, so we're back on Talkback. 721-1290 is our number. And so Mike, you wanted to make a quick point before we take a call. Go ahead.
I do. It's, even though that the Sheriff's Department and Chris, we're standing here front and center, we've got a lot of supporters within the Sealy Lake community who are behind us and are as passionate about this as we are. You've got, Condon, Sealy Lake, Potomac Fire, most of your first responders. We've got Forest Service law enforcement up there, Montana Fish and Game. They're all behind us. They're all going to be there at the assembly, to support our children.
That's awesome. Okay, let's get Doug on the line. You've been waiting the longest. Thank you for your patience, Doug. What's on your mind? Go ahead.
Hey, thanks for taking my call. You guys, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I'd like to know, excuse me, the amount of deaths that have occurred to suicide in, say, since 2010 in Missoula County, and what is that age demographic breakdown of those suicides?
Go ahead, John.
I can tell you. I can tell you a little bit. I can tell you last year. I think it was 35 deaths. Brenda, we did a story about this last year in Missoula County. I can't give you the age breakdown for everyone. Most of them were between the ages of 40 and
Didn't it
60.
rise like 35%?
It rose 15%.
15%.
I would say the normal per year was around the 20 mark in Missoula County. There's other counties in Montana that have had a much harder time than Missoula, but Missoula, overall, Montana is number one in the nation or number two on any given year for the number of suicides per capita. So it's a big deal, and Missoula County is an example of that. We're kind of average here in the state with 35, but it's way above the national average.
Okay, let's get Philip on the line. Philip, you are on Talkback. Real quickly, what's your question?
Well, thank you very much, and I commend everybody there for doing what they're doing on this. This is important, especially an open-minded school administrator. I'm just wondering, is there any component of this program that deals with deadly games kids play, like the choking game?
I'm not sure. So, Lowell, what do you think? Thanks for the call.
This particular assembly doesn't address that. But when you get a kid that will jump into that mentality or jump into that realm, it's not for fun and it's not for a rush. It's because they're at that vulnerable place, and so it does fit in there. We don't address that issue straightforward about those games, even though they're out there. But from the side, I guess they are addressed.
Okay. All right. So let's just cycle through here. Try to get one more call in. Andy, you're on Talkback. Go ahead, sir.
Good morning. Thanks for taking my call. I'm afraid this bullying issue is going to get nothing but worse with the recent election with Donald Trump, who's pretty much the largest bully in the world. Imagine if we elected somebody like Ben Carson, who was a perfect gentleman. He'd be a much better role model for the children than Donald Trump, who's been seen on national television bullying everybody who's questioned him. So I think it's really unfortunate. We need to look in the future on our elections, not just who covers our way of thinking, but also who's going to be a good role model. And I just think it's going to get worse with Donald Trump as a role model.
Okay, thanks for your call. Appreciate that. One more real quick call. Roy, you're on. We got about a minute. Go ahead.
Well, I'll make this fast. Thank you, gentlemen, for everything you do, and you're right on the mark. I had to take a suicide prevention course because we had a suicide in my family. In our family, one of my relatives completed it. My other one didn't complete it. I got two. I'm a single dad. I got two kids I'm helping raise here in the Bitterroot Valley. And I learned when they come home from school, they told me, "Dad, we're thinking of doing suicide." And I said, "Whatever gave you that idea?" I said, "Well, the kids are talking about it in school." And I just sat them down. I said, and they said, "What do you think, Dad?" I said, "Well, one thing, it would make me very unhappy. It would hurt a lot of people. And I would cry and be upset, and your Christian family would too. And I think we ought to explain to them about what happens if they do it, the effects on other people too."
Okay, I hate to do this. We're running out of time. That's a wonderful point. So we have less than a minute. So who wants to wrap up here? Jace or Mike, or how about Lowell? Go ahead. Why don't you?
Sure. Well, this is such a huge topic in an hour and a half. I know that there are people that want to give their opinion, and all these opinions are important. What makes it neat is that people want to be involved, and we can get grants, we can study this till we're blue in the face, but until each individual is willing to get involved, you've got to invest yourself. And one thing that we tell students is, what happens to one of you happens to all of you. And so it brings them to that realization.
All right. Thanks so much for joining us tomorrow. We'll have the Montana World Affairs Council. Have a great day.